Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and you're watching The Broken Meeple. This is a YouTube channel about board games where I give reviews, top 10s and my honest opinions, regardless of the consequences. We'll get on with the show in just a minute, but first a quick word from my sponsor. As a fellow gamer, you'll understand this is unacceptable. The solution? Head down to my new sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk. KIENDA stocks many of the hot new releases as well as some old hidden gems. Free delivery on orders over £30, further discounts on bulk purchases, and even 5% of your spending refunded back to you as points to be used for further discounts down the line. If you use the referral link in the description below and sign up for a new account, you'll get 5% discount on your first order over £60. So let's make gaps in your collection a thing of the past. Get down to KIENDA and start saving today. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the video.
Get on with it.
So now that New Year and the Christmas is over with, it's time to get back on the diet, lose the December paunch that I've built up over the last month, and I thought I'd start with some beer and bread. Maybe I need to rethink my diet a little bit.
Beefcake! Beefcake!
But this is a two-player game from Essen last year to get a lot of buzz unexpectedly. It came out, I didn't know much about it rules-wise, I had a look at the components and thought they looked cool, but I thought I'd wait and see. I had enough games to review and I'd come back to it later. Unfortunately, I couldn't get hold of a copy in the UK until after, just before the Christmas holidays, and I did my top 10 of the year at that point. But thanks to KIENDA for providing me with a review copy of this. I was glad to get this played over a Christmas period particularly, and I wanted to see what this one would be like, because even though I don't get two-player games to the table very often, it is nice to check these out every now and again, because I still hold on to a few two-player games like Great Plains and Patchwork and a couple of others, because for the times when I can play a game two-player, like say with my dad, or if I'm not if I bring a date home, for example, and they want to play games, great, I've got some easy two players to do so. It's nice to have some of these hanging around. Question is this one any good? Founded on the fruitful lands of an erstwhile monastery, two villages have held up the dual tradition of brewing beer and baking bread. While sharing fields and resources, they still find pride in their friendly rivalry of besting each other's produce. Each of you represents one of these villages. Over the course of 6 years, which alternate between fruitful and dry harvests, you must harmonize your duties of harvesting and storing resources, producing beer and bread, and selling them for coins and upgrading your facilities. However, in order to win, you must maintain the balance between your baked and liquid goods, because after the 6th year, you only score the coins collected from the type of good, beer or bread, for which you earned less. The village with the higher score, of course, is the winner.
Of course!
Now in this new segment, I like to try and compare a game to other games that are out there so you can get a feel of what this one is likely to be. But beer and bread actually sits in quite a unique category. Yeah, two-player only games are not like a new thing, but this one doesn't really feel similar to a lot of other two-player games that I've played. The whole idea of farming and gathering resources to make beer and bread is thematically similar to something like Agricola or Caverna or All Creatures Great and Small, shall we say, for the Agricola one. In fact, that would probably be the closest comparison I would make to this game, the two-player Agricola version. But honestly, the multi-use cards aspect is more akin to something like Valley of the Kings, where you had a card that you played on your turn and you had 2 or 3 different uses for the card, but you had to decide what use you were going to do. You could only pick one. But Valley of the Kings is a deck building game, and this one doesn't do deck building. You simply have a hand of cards every round. It's quite a unique game in its own way, and you know what? Plus points, because we're seeing a lot of the same type of game made these days, and for this one to come out and go, you know what, I want to try something a little bit different, then kudos. So let's start off with the pros, and we kick off with the production quality for a kickoff. This is a very well produced game for, what, 25 quid or so that I think it cost to buy. It's got a lot of stuff in this box, even though it doesn't look it. Firstly, you've got quite a lot of cards, which are all fairly sturdy, fairly sturdy cardstock. I actually would say that you don't necessarily need to sleeve these. Couldn't hurt, but I reckon they'll last a fair while without needing to care too much about sleeve or scuffed corners and that. You've got a score pad, you've got a rule book that's really easy to understand and read with pictorial representation. A bag full of wooden components galore. Whoop. Look at that. All of the different resources that you can get, from barleys to hops to water and that. Although, good luck trying to guess which one of these is which until the book tells you. I mean, does that look like anything in particular compared to this, compared to this? Maybe if your beer knowledge is really, really good, but for me, I had to keep looking them up every now and again, or just refer to them by their color after a while. And then you've got the board itself, illustrated by Michael Menzel, which if you know anything about artists in the board game industry, Michael Menzel makes some of the best looking boards ever. Lots of little Easter eggs everywhere. But one thing to say is that even though you do have a very nice looking board here, it's not exactly a small table presence. You've got this in front of you, which already looks like a decent sized board. But then on top of that, you're going to have cards around it. You're going to have cards, below and above it for your upgrade cards, etc. And then you've just got, you've got everything in front of you as well, like the cards that you have played. So overall, it's not exactly a travel game. Don't think that you're going to necessarily take this on holiday with you unless you're staying in a particularly good location or accommodation. Because as much as the box is relatively small, it's not a particularly huge box in general, there's a lot of stuff packed in here, and once you get it out to play, you're going to have to hope that you've got a proper sized table in order to manage it.
What's this? I said take only what you need to survive.
Do not try and play this at the airport or any other place with small or round tables. It's just not going to work. The rules in general are not very tricky to understand. It didn't take me long to learn this game from pretty much reading the rule book and playing it straight away without doing it in advance. Everything is clearly laid out. The order of everything is in good order. The pictorial representation explains stuff that's a little unclear. The only one minor gripe I have with it is that there is a rule about harvest cards where you play these cards which are multi-use, and when you play harvest cards, you gain the resources on the card you've played as well as on cards you've played previously for harvest that have the same resources pictured. It's not the most intuitive rule in the world, and some people have tripped up on that. You've got a rules reference on the back of the book. Thank you, somebody's getting it with these rules references. The overview of the game is nicely laid out, color coordinated. I mean, there's a couple of rules that you may still have to check the book for, but if you're coming back to this after having not played it for a little while, this will get you back and going nicely, and all you got to do is just keep it nearby. Keep it nicely, and if you are stuck with a few card upgrades, well then the back couple of pages tells you how every single one of them works, so you've got a very comprehensive reference guide just waiting for you here if necessary. The multi-use card aspect, easily my favourite part. This deck is shuffled together and it consists of beer and bread cards, but each one has 3 different uses to deal with. The top bit is how you get resources by playing them to gain more resources from a shared field, so if your opponent nicks all the wheat, well then there's no wheat for you. The middle part is actually producing the order, spend the resources to get the actual item, and the bottom bit is what you slide underneath your board in various places to gain the ability upgrade. That's what all the cards do. They're pretty straightforward abilities to understand. All the orders are nice and easy. The graphic design is dead simple. If you're colorblind, it's a little bit harder, but the different resources are pictured differently, so it is easy to distinguish between them. But this part is kind of what makes this game. The whole idea of, I get resources and I make beer and bread and score the lowest is nothing new. It's not the highlight of the game. But I always love games with multi-use cards. That challenge of going, right, this card's got a lot of cool stuff I can do with it, but I gotta pick one. I really want to make an order with this card, but then I don't get this funky ability. Alright, well maybe I need to get some more wheat. Well, this has wheat on it, but, oh, wait a minute, but then it's got an ability I quite like. Well, which one do I do? Tomato, tomato. But what elevates this to the next level beyond just being simply multi-use cards is the difference between the 2 years. In fruitful years and dry years, to be more exact. Fruitful years, everybody has a hand of 5 cards or so, but then after everybody's played a card, you then pass the cards to your opponent and do the same again, and then pass them back and forth. So you're not only looking at which cards you think are pretty cool, but then you're going to get a hand with new cards in it and get more choices, but then you're also thinking, well, hang on a minute, I fancy using this card later. Is the opponent likely to take it and use it before it gets back to me? It's another tactical decision to make, and of course, it adds to that sense of tension where you go, right, well, I need to do this card now, so I'm going to do this, I'm going to give these to you, and then as soon as they give them back, you're hoping, was it still there, was it still there? Oh, I used it, damn it. You know, it gets to you every now and again in a really good way. But then in the dry harvest, it then refreshes things a little bit by saying, right, you don't pass these cards back now, you keep them. But then you have 3 cards that sit next to your board face up that you can basically go, well, you know what, I quite like that one there, so I'm going to exchange this card with that and play this instead. It's a nice little tweak, a nice little variation to keep the game fresh as it goes on. But then you're thinking, well, If I put it down there as an exchangeable card, that means it's on show for the opponent. But then maybe I put down a card that I want to use later out of my hand, in which case I can just pick it up later. It's like, ooh, another little tweak to the tactical decision making that you have in this game. I also like the neat little twist with storage. Storage is normally something that frustrates me with a lot of these games. The idea that I'm like, oh, I got all this lovely production and stuff, and it's like, oh, now I gotta fit it places. Oh, I got not enough shed space to put it in, you know, no, woe is me. I like to get stuff. I don't like to have to worry about the logistics of where I put it. Well, here, yeah, you've got the logistics of, oh, I can only have 10 odd resources, or is it 9? I forget. Yeah, there's 9 resources. But there's a little tweak with this one that I quite like. Yes, you only have room for 9 resources, but anything that you get in excess of 9 resources isn't just lost, it's offered to the opponent. So it adds a little bit more of an incentive to store efficiently. It's alright well saying that I can get a ton of wheat every year. So it's like, yay, I get a ton of wheat. Well, I don't need this much wheat, and now I've used up half my shed. And if I get more resources for the stuff I need, suddenly I'm like, well, hang on, I've got too much. Hey, buddy, do you want a wheat? And they get to decide whether to have it, or it just gets chucked back out of the game. But I like that. It's a cool little twist, and that's something that I think I'm getting from this game in general. It's not doing anything brand new, but it's taking mechanics that I either like or, you know, don't normally give much of a hoot about before, and just adjusting them slightly, tweaking them a little bit, putting a new twist on it. The multi-use cards with passing them between players and then having 2 different years where they are treated differently. That's a new twist. The storage, where the excess storage is offered to the opponent for a change, because I can't think of any game that does that. Usually excess storage is lost, but to have the opponent get their hands on it makes you think a little bit better about being efficient, because you might just give your opponent a bit too much of a leg up if you're giving them resources on a regular basis. Just little things like that elevate this one. Scores have been pretty tight in this game as well. You only score the lowest of the 2 that you've done, beer and bread, and there have been times where it's literally come down to 1, maybe 2 points, even the occasional tiebreaker. If someone does badly, then yes, they could lose by a bit more, but this is not a game where somebody's going to win by 10 points, and somebody's going to have 20 points and you're going to have 10. Nah, things have to go pretty catastrophically bad for that to happen. Typically, you'll finish around the 20-odd mark, and then you'll be like, right, well, I got 22 there, but then I got 25 in this one, so I only get 22, and then somebody comes along and goes, well, I've got 23 in that one, even though I've got 26 in that one, well, I get 23 then, and they beat you by 1. It keeps it close, it keeps it tight, and you're never truly certain who's going to win by the end, because once you've completed the orders, they go face down out of the game, and so you don't total them up until later. It's not like you can see what the opponents made during the game. You kind of just have to remember, well, they did pretty well on bread. I haven't seen them make a lot of beer. Maybe that's the thing. I don't know. So it keeps it tense. It keeps it, engaging, but it also means that by the end of the game, you haven't called the winner. This is not the shortest game in the world. It's still not a long game. But if you're thinking of buying this and thinking, oh yeah, this will be a nice little 20-minute filler that we can get done in no time at all, not gonna happen. This is not a filler. It says 30 to 45 minutes on the box. 30 minutes is pushing it.
Yeah, in your bra.
Even if you know what you're doing, to get through 6 rounds where you're looking at the cards, trying to do different things, replenishing the board, and setting it up in the first place, 30 minutes is pushing it. You're looking at more 45 minutes, and it's probably going to take you an hour to get through your first game or so, particularly if you've got a new opponent. So it kind of takes it out of the filler category, and so there are probably other 2-player games like, say, Great Plains that I mentioned earlier that would suit a filler gateway game better. It's also not quite in the gateway level category here. This one is definitely not a midway or heavy game. It's not. There's not enough in this game to take it to that level. But I would call this next step. I wouldn't want to bring this out in front of a new gamer who's not seen games before, because they're going to look at all these cards and go, oh, the choices, what do? I don't know if this ability's better than that one, and have I done well on beer? I don't know, and I know, well, hang on, I'm passing these back to you. Now I've got to look at all these new things. It's going to be too overwhelming for the majority of new gamers to this. But once they're comfortable with something a little bit simpler, then by all means jump into this, because this is a very good next step game. The variety in this game is good, but not great. Mainly the variety comes from the abilities that you can upgrade your farm with, and there's a decent amount of them. I mean, you got a lot of cards, but there is a lot of rinse repeat here. You'll get a lot of these ones that say at the start of a harvest, collect one resource. Well, you got multiple resources, so there's lots of variants of that. But then you've also got the ones where it's like, at the game end, if you've sold lots of 6 or 7 value cards, you get another coin for each one. And then there'll be one for 5 or 6, and then there'll be one for 4 and 5, and then one for 3 and 4, and it's just little tweaks on it. When you actually boil it down and look through these, there's not a huge amount of different abilities on these, and I would have quite liked to have seen just a little bit more variety in here, but that's not to say that these abilities aren't great to have. I mean, as I say, the multi-use aspect of this game certainly does mean that you're looking at these cards going, I want it for this, but I also want it for that ability because that sounds cool. Although you're going to be harvesting and getting abilities a lot more often than you're going to be making orders for a kickoff, so you are going to be doing quite a few upgrades to your farm, and they're cumulative. Yeah, if you want to have an extra storage, you can have 2 extra storage or 3 extra storage. You want to get 1 barley every year, well now you can have 2 barley, you can have 3 barley. You know, you can basically stack things and create some interesting paths, but still just would have liked that little bit of extra variety in the abilities themselves. So Beer and Bread has become a decent little surprise for me from last year. One that I wasn't expecting much from, but it has legitimately impressed me. Would it have been a contender for the top 10 of the year? Maybe. It certainly could have potentially ended up on the bottom part of it, but as it stands, it's a really solid 2-player game that I do recommend people try and get. Do I wish there was a bit more variety in the abilities? Yeah, but it's not a massive deal. Do I wish it was shorter? Yes, it certainly does go to 45 minutes to an hour a lot more often than it does at 30 minutes, which does take it out of the filler category, which means that this is not the easiest one to bring out. It's kind of getting to that point where you might want to bring something a little bit more meaty for that length of time. Add to that that it's also a little bit of a table hog as well, means that this doesn't quite fit the portable category, and the rules are simple, but not quite gateway level. So this is filling an interesting little niche for a 2-player game. Light, but not quite gateway. Small, but not quite portable. And not too long, but also not filler length either. But it does what it does well, and even though it doesn't have a solo mode in it, which is a bit of a shame. I've heard there's an unofficial one out there, but I'm not reviewing this based on unofficial modes. This is 2-player only, there is no solo mode included, and I would have liked to have possibly seen a way to play this solo. But it could have been too difficult. You could have just had some card deck where the autumner kind of flips and takes the odd resource or gives you occasional storage now and again. I reckon it could have been done, and it would have just been a nice little addition to add to the variety, but that said, not a massive deal. Beer and Bread has impressed me, and I do recommend it for 2-player games, particularly if you're into this farming theme that I'm into, so especially also if you like multi-use cards, that is definitely the forefront of this game, so if that's a mechanic you love, definitely want to check out. I'm giving Beer and Bread a solid 8 out of 10. I think it's a great game. It's definitely a surprise as well, because I wasn't expecting a great deal from it, and as I played it, I'm like, that was pretty cool. Let's do that again. And I played it more, and I still would like to keep this in the collection and play it again at times. It's just a case of how often I'm going to be able to play it, given that I'm not the biggest one to get 2-player only games to the table. But I still highly recommend it. 8 out of 10, seal of approval. Definitely worth a look.
Shut up and take my money!
So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. I'm Luke Hector, and if you've enjoyed what you've seen, then please thumb this up here on YouTube, but also thumb it up on Board Game Geek when I post it there shortly after. But most of all, I would like you to get your comments down below. I like to engage with my audience, and I'd like to know your thoughts on this game, other farming games that are similar. Maybe let us know of any other games that you think this is similar to that I missed out in the early part of this video. I'd certainly like to get you to know your thoughts, and I always enjoy reading and responding to them when I can. So take care, and remember as always, regardless of whether beer or bread is your thing, it's still only a game. Bye for now, everyone.